So Rachel, how long have you been working with clay for?
I started working with clay when I was 11. So when I went up to secondary school, our head of art at the local comprehensive was a ceramicist. So we had a fully kitted out ceramics workshop with a kiln room and everything we needed. So from then, I've just always done it. I've never not done it since I was 11.
Where did you study after that?
I did a BA at Barrow Ashton campus in Bristol, and then I came up to London and had a few years with part-time job and part-time studio, and then I went to the Royal College to do my MA. When I went to the Royal College, I had the sense that I was doing with the right material, obviously working with clay, but I sort of hadn't found like my work in that sense. So I spent the first year looking at things and reading, and I got really interested in ideas of metamorphosis, transformation, in between states. And I wanted a clay that was, well, white, because I felt that colour really locates meaning, and everything I was interested in was something in a state of change. So I didn't want meaning fixed through colour. So that's why I chose to start working with porcelain. I knew nothing about porcelain other than obviously that it was white. So when I started working with it, I realised it's quite distinct in how it behaves. There are certain things it's happy to do and other things it resists quite strongly. And then there's what I would like the clay to do. So within that exchange really between me and clay, then that's where the work comes from.
What were the first pieces that you started making with porcelain?
The first pieces I made were really tiny sort of fragments almost. And I sort of, would start at one end and then work model through to the other end. And then I started putting the works on a plinth just to sort of give them a territory. It went from there. And I feel at that point with my work was almost like learning my vocabulary, which then, as you go on, you can sort of do more things once you've learnt the basics almost.
Because it feels like there's a very organic nature to the work that you make.
Yes.
Do you have a strong sense of what the final piece will look like, or is it something that evolves as you're working?
I never really know what I'm doing. So I just start and then it is responding to the material. I mean, sometimes I'm, like with the cartouche, the Through a Glass series here, I had an area of interest that I wanted to poke and sort of inquire about. But as to what the actual work looks like, I only know that when I've made it. And the same way I do drawing, but I don't draw and then make what I've drawn, because then if you're working in the moment and then it starts going off that way and your drawing went that way, then it's not as instinctual as working with clay.
And I imagine that the three-dimensional quality of the clay is so different to drawing.
Yes.
That different things happen as you're working with the medium.
Yes.
Shall we talk a little bit about the series in the exhibition, yes, Through a Glass, and how this came about?
So I was interested in a cartouche as a device for sort of framing and containing. And I wanted to push that through adornment and my modelling to see if I could almost make that device rupture and break and then become something else, which is similar to how we are and how we become who we are, that sometimes we choose to break those definitions or a given definition of who we are, or sometimes life changes who we thought we were and how we were. So I was interested in those ideas, that the idea of being safe and being contained and those boundaries, we do that to make ourselves feel safe, but they're also an artifice in a way, that at any point we can change those framing structures for ourselves to sort of exist within. And then within modelled sort of border, the flat plane is, as you can see, it's broken. So then they start being suggestive of like a portal or a way through into another way of being or another sense of place, and then mirrors and frames and, you know, how we see ourselves and how we know ourselves to be, which of course ties in perfectly with self-made.
And I think there's a really strong theme of renewal that comes through in your work as well, which is definitely played out in this series.
Yes, that's through a lot of the organic modelling, and then things sort of like being born or then sort of collapsing away. There's that sort of ambiguity with the forms. And I think as well they're particularly, well, they work well in the Foundling Museum because there are a lot of references to, the cartouches up in the museum, and then also the sphere that's within the works.
Like these ones here.
Yes, exactly, is similar in a way to there's the Hogarth print that shows the lottery of the babies being selected to come to the hospital or to be rejected from hospital. And also the great courtroom upstairs with the beautiful cornicing around the room. So, and then also the very ornate frame. So I think there's a real shared vocabulary between the works and the sense of what the, well, in a way, the Foundling Hospital did contain and keep safe the babies and children.
Absolutely. Even these ribbons are quite reminiscent, aren't they, of some of the fabric tokens that were left with children to help identify them if their parents were able to come and reclaim them. So this is an exhibition with 4 artists, and although you all work in very, very different ways, there are some really lovely resonances and connective threads that are running between the work. I think you've talked before about this idea of, you know, a shared material and that, again, a shared vocabulary, even though each artist uses a different form of clay and expresses it in a different way. I was just wondering, you know, where you think those connections are.
Clay is just like a lump when you first get it out of the bag, and then that's very striking when you come in here and realise that everyone has sort of brought themselves and their hands to a material that is is just something completely different. Their works are so different from one another, and yet they have a shared through the process of working with malleable clay and then firing it and that sort of vitrified results. But yes, the forms as well within the work, there are overlaps within that too.
Yeah, it's really amazing to think, isn't it, that, you know, each of these pieces in the room all started essentially with the same...
Like a lump of mud.
Yes.
That's how it all began.
But also the idea that each of you has your identity literally imprinted onto the surface of the work that you're making, through that touch and through the way that clay remembers. Yes,
through the body. I think that, and the movement to make the work becomes part of the work. When I always, my work is not autobiographical, but then there is something of all of us within our work because of that physical, the directness from, you know, the material, the clay body and your own body as a maker. And even things, you know, the size of your hands, the strength of your hands, how you manipulate, that's all, you know, part of how it's made.
You've shown here at the Foundling Museum before, so you had some sense of the story behind the Foundling Hospital and what some of those themes are that run through the Foundling around care, belonging and identity. What do you sort of feel your relationship with the museum was coming into this project?
I think from the first exhibition I had, which was the paintings of Joseph Highmore, and he'd made, I think it was the Angel of Mercy, the painting, that was showing a sort of London street scene, and then a woman in the front with her baby. And then in the back was an angel, like pointing to the Foundling Hospital, as that's a place to go, you know, to take your baby. So we spoke during the exhibition a lot about how that was very innovative in the 18th century.
Yes.
To provide that area of care for the children, but also through the children for their mothers, and how that Thomas Coram was a pioneer in that with his women of class and distinction who supported him. And I think even then we were saying how in the 18th century a woman and her body and her children was important and seen as something to be protected. And then back then, I don't want to go into politics too much, but it feels that we're further back in our care of each other and women and their bodies than they were in the 18th century. So, the Foundling Hospital and the museum it's such a visceral place to come because it is all those relationships and it's really important, maybe even more so now, as the museum now. So anyway, all that's very important to come return and to think more with the works of who we are and how we make ourselves and how ourselves are made through life and our experiences.
Rachel, can you tell me a little bit about this sculpture, Souvenir?
Yes, this piece again is the idea of how we're formed and how we're made. And I was interested in the idea that our life and our experiences that make our lives, it's not linear. So this is almost geological in things sort of resting one on top of the other. And so sort of beginnings and ends of things meet and meld and merge. So we are sort of the sum of our parts that aren't chronological. They're all the things that make us who we are. And then again, I've used the frame here is another sort of like a sort of postcard almost, or a symbol here of again the framing and the identity.
A bit like a mirror.
Yes, exactly, like reflecting back. Yes.
And there's also the orb forms that are in the cartouche works.
Yes, they're my sort of overdetermined symbol in a way, because the orb is like a ball, an egg, the moon, all different, an eye, and a bubble. So sort of mortality, the bubble of that.
And I'm interested also in these small cracks and ruptures that are obviously so inherent to the nature of the material that kind of almost has a life of its own.
The cracks, I can't really control where and how it cracks. I have an idea and can encourage it to happen. That's more during the firing process of the cooling of the work. But the rupturing gives the work, I think, a sort of sense of unease and the idea of something sort of changing. It's in transition and splitting apart, and beginnings or splitting apart because it's decomposing. So sort of both those things again.